Hi, Louise.
Hello. How are you, Susan?
Good, thank you. Let me try to share my screen.
Looks like we have low attendance today.
Yeah, usually the Wednesday meeting is quieter than the 4 p.m.
Right.
But Tara and Matt did reach out to me. They were interested in the release process for RC. But they may not be able to attend the meeting today. So I've said to them, like, we'll discuss it today and I will update the notes and also notify them if there's anything like unexpected.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll probably just like wait for a couple of minutes to see if Jimmy will join. He typically joins the Wednesday one, right?
Yeah. I don't know if he can't make it today though, but can wait for him.
Yeah, I was actually chatting with him earlier this morning. He said he would join. He has some questions to ask.
Okay, great. Yeah, I see him joining. Yeah, okay, let's get started. I did see a new issue from Jimmy. So Jimmy, I've added the item to the discussion.
Okay.
Do you have any other agenda items I should add?
No.
Okay, cool. So just a quick review on the PR status. I don't think we need to go into details for some of them. So Akash, I saw your comment about the verifier CRDs. I think the doc PR may go before the version bump just because like there's a lot more changes in the version bump, but do you think we can merge the CRD docs today?
Yeah, I think the doc looks good, and thanks for spending the time and adding all those details, especially for the default values of the fields. It's like super helpful.
Yeah.
I left a few comments on there, just minor suggestions, but apart from that, I think it's ready to go. We can get this one in today, and then I can just point out to Bin that he may need to update those
them,
docs
yeah.
in his PR. So
yeah, and I also think there was some discussion about like how do we version our docs? Could you start, like I only watched half of the video and then I had to go to something else. Is the summary like we should have the doc correspond to, we should have say docs for alpha 1 and we should also have a different set of docs for beta 1.
Yeah, so I'm trying to recall exactly what Sirtak had said. So when referring to version specifically in the doc, if we're going to link to anything, he obviously recommended point to like a versioning page versus specific version links directly in the documentation where it's shared. But specific documentation changes between versions. Yeah, I don't exactly recall what he was saying. Gatekeeper what route they went down. Luis, do you remember what was the recommendation from their
Yeah,
side?
I think he did have specific docs for each version. He did provide a couple links from Gatekeeper source that we can take a look. But yeah, definitely this is we can probably drill a little bit more or start a thread that talks about our discussion that talks specifically about this. We should definitely look into doing this next RC.
I see. So in this case, like Akash, I wonder for these, because the current docs have alpha 1 version, I can check this in as is, and maybe later we can create separate folders for, like at the moment, alpha 1 properties are exactly the same as beta 1, right? But once we have introduced new properties between versions, we probably need to have a set of different docs.
Right. Yeah, I think this shouldn't block your doc merge, Susan. But we should definitely talk about the strategy moving forward. Potentially look this as a next release deliverable.
Yeah, sounds good. Next PR, the CRD versioning to V1 beta. I'm still going through the PR. I had a question, Akash. Like we had this discussion about cleanup. Like for example, in the CRD charts, CRD directory, it's where we store all the CRD definitions to be installed with the new Ratify install, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like at the moment we have, I think Binbin has added beta 1 on top of alpha 1. But our latest chart would always have the latest beta version or whatever is the latest. So do we want to install all the versions, or do we kind of just care about the latest?
So my understanding was that he's updated, so there's side by side because that's the proper convention for a queue builder, but he's added like a deprecation to the V1 Alpha 1 API version. So I think it should automatically look for the V1 Beta 1 resources to install. I can point you to that, but I don't know exactly how this works. So he's probably still the best person to ask for this. So
okay. And do you know on Ratify uninstall, like on Helm uninstall, did we clean up like for example in the upgrade scenario, right? Do we delete the alpha resources?
That's a good question. I don't know. Yeah, we should definitely follow up on that before we merge this in.
Yeah, I'd like.
Yeah.
The more I look at the changes that we have to do, I see that Sertouch also. Well, I mean, I see Binbin actually added some code to basically be able to convert between the different structs, different APIs. This looks scary to me to try to fit into RC2. I feel like we should have a conversation, a bigger conversation with Binbin on these changes. So potentially, how do people feel about moving the versioning to RC3?
I see Toddy and Sajay just joined.
There you go. Oh, yeah.
I think we need to discuss with Shinhei as well, because there was some expectation that we would have this in by Friday for his dependencies. But
got it. I see. Do they depend on us for like being for beta 1?
I think there were questions in review on his side on when that would happen, and they had communicated that it would be done by this Friday. I don't know if it's a hard requirement on their end or not. We'd have to follow up with him.
Okay, yeah, let's start a thread there on that one. I do want to have at least Binbin on here just to walk through the changes. This looks very scary to me.
Yeah, maybe we can also review the migration story. Like if they already have Ratify and a bunch of the Alpha 1 resources,
Right,
and
like
the new version, what does
I-
it mean?
yeah, I don't want to. I'd rather us kind of go with saying, hey, this is the alpha, and rather than breaking certain customers. So I'd like to have a better conversation on this one. Let me also follow up with Shinya on the expectation here, and Charles. Or Sajay, do you have any opinion here?
This is the CRD to support V1 beta 1.
Yes,
It's a big change.
it is.
I don't want to govern my decision by fear because I don't know anything at this point, but I would, like you said, let's talk to Binbin and Singhe because he owns the PR as well as Singhe is going to consume this. So
Right.
if they validated it, then I think it's okay. But
Okay.
from anybody else's side, is there any other concerns? Like lack of understanding is one concern, but I think is there anything else that's standing out to people who have reviewed it?
Jimmy, any thoughts on your side?
No,
Okay.
So Satak is also mentioning about moving this into another API, right?
Right. So I'm looking at the PR. He basically like he's done that, Binbin. But yeah, I would like to have him sort of walk us through this. Maybe we can set up something for later today, or maybe tomorrow with Shinya and Charles, just to make sure we're all sort of in the same page. If this is indeed required for Friday, or if we can defer.
Yeah, even if it's later during the day, just make sure you just mark it as a Zoom call and put it on the note.
Yeah, it'll be a Zoom call.
Yeah, okay.
so is this I'm trying to understand, is this a late, a last minute ad, or, I mean, why are we having such grief about the possibility of this in or out of RC2?
It's well, we need to figure that out, but it might be a requirement for an internal milestone.
Okay.
But again, like it'll go through. It's just a matter of when.
So I mean, is there still an opportunity, like, we've been testing with RC1 and RC2 code in the main branch, on our side. So, I mean, is that something that can still happen, or does it have to be in RC2 to support your internal milestone?
It needs to be an official build.
Okay.
Is there any other option to cut a RC3 if this needs to go, because it is a new API version in some way, right?
Right. Yeah, that could be another option. That's why I want to have more folks in the discussion. So I'll set up a meeting in Zoom. In terms of when do we need to get this change in, and if it can wait, we can wait. Does that make sense?
Yeah, with the person who wants the PR not on the call, I don't think we can make a decision anyway.
Right. So yeah, okay. So I'll set up something for either later today or maybe early or tomorrow, so that we can. It's kind of Binbin is in China, so it probably needs to be at a later date here in Seattle. Okay.
Yeah, we'll follow up more. The other two changes are test changes. I guess, Akash, you need a review on the 671.
Yeah, if I could just get a review, I think this is just a first batch of unit testing that I've added to improve our code coverage. It gets us about 5% more coverage, specifically in the ORS store case where we had no unit tests before. So just adds more mocking and then more unit tests for that, as well as for the cosine scenarios too.
Great. I'll be able to review that probably today.
Very, very cool, Akash. Thanks for
Thanks.
increasing the coverage.
Okay. On our agenda today, the first item is to discuss the RC2 release timeline and what process we'll be following. And Matt and Kara did reach out just to confirm that they want to confirm everything in main is going to be a part of RC2 release. I've told them like we haven't cut a release branch. So Luis, do you know?
Yeah, it is.
how
I
we're
mean,
gonna-
at this point, we'll just cut it out from what we have now. I think at this point, we also have the tests in place to get confidence that things that we can basically, we don't need to do a lot of additional manual validation. So yeah, let's just maybe cut the release after we have the conversation about the beta change. And then we just release this week.
Got it. So we will release from main.
Yes.
So we're not doing any cherry picking this time.
No.
Sounds good. And from your side, Jimmy, are there any changes that you still need to include for RC2?
Well, no, I mean, the issue that's listed there is so brand new that I don't have a prototype in Ratify working yet. And I need to actually talk through how we would want to implement what I'm thinking. So no, this would be a post RC2 thing. So I don't have anything.
Okay, yeah, thanks for confirming. So RC2, we're looking at, like, we're gonna have a follow-up discussion with Bin, and depending on how that goes, like, we'll probably cut Thursday or Friday.
Yes, correct.
Cool.
Okay, so before we get into the, well, I should say, can we put another item on here to discuss RC3?
Yeah, sure.
And I say that because this issue that I need to fix, you know, I need to understand. I have to go back to my folks and help them understand the way it works right now. And if they can't accept that, then I need to understand when an RC3 would be available. So
Yeah, we can talk about it now. Luis, do we already have plans for RC3?
We have a milestone. We've been running typically on a monthly cadence. So we would be looking potentially at the end of March.
okay.
So that's kind of our current cadence. Yeah. So that's kind of what I would be looking at.
Okay.
Cool. Anything else related to RC3 before we move on? No? Okay. Yeah, Toddy had a question that I added on the agenda about, Jimmy, were you able to figure out how to work with notation plugin? Like a couple of weeks ago, you were looking for where does notation go library read? Like, does it have a default plugin location where it reads from? Were you able to figure that out?
Yeah. So the plugins, that's already part of the notation directory structure, right? So it's a matter of pulling the plugin down from an OCI registry, moving it into the Ratify file system, and then updating the, I believe it's the trust. Let me look here real quick. I believe it's the trust policy, but I'll have to look real quick. But yeah, it's a matter of updating either the trust policy or the trust store. Let's see here. So the trust store. So it's a matter of updating the trust store underneath the signing authority tree, right? So you've got trust store, and then you got X509, and you got signing authority. And then the name of your trust store or name of your signing authority, I should say. And then actually, I take it back. I take that back. That's where the actual root cert would go. The plugin actually would go up underneath the main notation tree, which is usually controlled by an XDG config environment variable, so according to the notation documentation. So that's where, I would pull the OCI down, the OCI image down, and then take that plugin and plop it in there with a specific directory structure.
Oh, nice. So you're unblocked from that.
Well, at least I know where it goes. I don't know. I haven't done it yet. So
Got it.
my progress on the Ratify side has been stopped somewhat because of other priorities that I've been given. So
Yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing the location. Toddy, does that answer your question?
That answers my question. I'm still curious, like Jimmy, if that works. So when you test it, if you can actually give us an idea whether that works and how it works. The second concern that I had, and we were discussing this yesterday with Akash and Susan, is how will that actually play with security, having in mind that the plugin is executable and the communication between like notary executable and the plugin executable, whatever, actually the notary libraries and the executable that is the plugin goes over the standard in and standard out. So those are kind of the questions we were discussing.
Yeah, those are great questions. So I've only tested this using the binary. I've not tested this with the notation Go libraries. But to give you an idea, the binary just uses credentials that I pull from ECR auth, right? So these are just basic auth credentials. So my assumption is that basic auth credentials would still be used for the notary, Go libraries, right? When you are building out the object graph for the trust store and the trust policy inside Ratify. And so I do not give it specific. I don't give the plugin specific different basic credentials. However, for our solution, this plugin has to reach up into the AWS API. And so the pod in which this plugin physically resides, which would be the Ratify pod, it has a workload identity attached to it, using our IAM rules for service accounts, and the permissions that the plugin needs for execution are inside that URSA permissions. So to give you an idea how that works is when we give the workload identity to the pod using IAM rules for service accounts, that same workload identity is what I'm using in the code to pull basic credentials from ECR, which are region specific. At the same time, that role that's attached to the pod, that workload identity is the same thing that is used by the plugin to make its calls directly to AWS. And this is all binary stuff. So this is not within the so even though, again, this is all done by notation binary. I haven't done it with notation library yet, but the notation library would still be using notation binary, would still be using the signer, or excuse me, the signing plugin binary.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it would still be a binary. I don't think there's a strategy for adding plugins that are libraries yet, as far as I know from the notation side of the house.
Exactly. There is none right now.
So, I mean, while I'm not, my testing does not show that the credentials are actually being used by the plugin as much as the permissions are being used by the plugin. So because the plugin is not interrogating our ECR, it's interrogating another API.
But it's the same credentials, right? Which means that now you use the same credentials that
It's the same workload identity credentials. So there's two different layers of credentials, right? So there's a workload identity credential that comes in via JOT. And then that is resolved to get credentials for, let's say, making SDK calls and stuff like that. And one of the SDK calls that I make is to get ECR specific basic auth credentials, username, password. So that's like a multi-layered set of credentials, right? Finally, I get ECR credentials, but those are not the same credentials that I'm using for the actual plugin. That's so I don't know yet how it's going to work or what I'm going to have to change when I do it through Ratify and the actual Notation Go libraries.
Yeah, let me iterate that just to understand, to make sure I understand what you're explaining. So when you deploy Ratify, right? So Ratify has a workload identity. In this, like Ratify needs to communicate with ECR. That's the one place, and also with whatever other service that you have the keys stored in. Is that correct? Or
So yeah, so on when we deploy Ratify on one of our clusters internal to AWS, we give it a workload identity using URSA, and that workload identity is tied back to an IAM role that has two sets of permissions attached to it. One set is to give it the readability into ECR in general. And then the other set of permissions is to give it the plugin permissions to make separate API calls, outside of the ECR API. The workload identity is then also used to get credentials, basic auth credentials, so that the notation calls can be made. So to give you an idea, we're doing a separate testing of notation binary as well. So that's why I know how to do it with the binary and the plugin, and have not tested it yet with the internal Ratify Go libraries. So
okay. Yeah, I'll be curious to hear when you test it with Ratify, whether you hit some issues and what those are, right? Hopefully everything works, but at least kind of understanding these flows. And of course,
yeah.
again, from security point of view, is also because this is a separate process, everything is in the context of the Ratify pod, that maybe it's fine, but I don't know. So whether
Well, I think so personally, I think it's pushing the envelope a little bit, how we're delivering, or how we've decided that we're going to deliver plugins using OCI images. It's kind of pushing the envelope of an immutable pod, because after the pod comes up, even if it's in an init cycle, it's still going to reach out and grab an OCI image and then change the landscape of the pod, even though it's purposeful, it is changing the pod. So, I mean, but other than that, my assumption is that how it's going to work, and it is that we're going to pull down the OCI image. We're going to take the binary out of there and put it in the right notation directory structure, so that Notation Go libraries will find it based off of the trust policy that I give it. So that my trust policy will be able to tell it, we'll give it specific information about how to use this plugin, and then Notation Go should be able to find it if it's in the right directory structure.
What that means is that actually you will not build the binary into the actual Ratify image. You will pull it after you run the pod. Is that correct?
That's how I'm aware of the OCI thing working. I haven't tested this yet, but I thought that's how it worked. Am I misunderstanding something?
No, that is, I think, something that Noel demoed a while back, right, Susan?
Yeah.
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 But I wasn't actually coming up even from that point of view. My expectation was that whatever plugin, you will create a custom Ratify image that you'll be kind of baking the plugin itself into that image.
So
And
we have tested that exact scenario on another effort that we're doing, and it works just fine. We actually use a two container approach where we use an init container to distribute binaries into a empty dir volume that gets shared in the pod, and then we use the application container to come up, and it now has access to the whatever binaries we've put into that volume. So that works just fine. I have not seen the demo. I apologize. I've never watched the video of the meeting for the demo, but I was under the impression that that's how the OCI piece was going to work, was that we did not want to get into the business of managing a separate Ratify image. I didn't think that was the best solution for customers in general. We could, as a last resort, I think that's a fallback position, is to store the binary, in an image that, either in a init image or even in, the Ratify app image. But we're trying to avoid that. That way, then the plugin could be, stored in a reachable OCI registry, and then we could pull it down as part of the configuration.
Yeah, I think at the time Toddy brought up the security concern, like how do you know the binary that you pulled down from the remote registry is authentic and hasn't been tampered with?
Well, I mean, there you have it. I mean, it's like the chicken and egg thing, I guess, right? I mean,
yeah,
we're getting this plugin so that we can do exactly that for downstream images.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, we could look into that. If maybe there's maybe there's a checksum thing that we can do. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't have like the complete answer to that. We were just discussing this yesterday with Susan and Akash, but yeah.
I was thinking along the same lines myself. I was trying to figure out, configuration wise, we could introduce, for the plugin that we need to configure, we could also introduce, here's the checksum for the plugin, but then we would have to write additional code to verify that plugin checksum once that we know the file's physically there. So, or once we expect that the file's physically there. So, I mean, it's possible. It's just, I don't know. I don't have my mind around the solution yet.
Okay. Keep us updated. So what you figure out, and we will keep you updated what we figure out on our side and what the thoughts are.
Yep.
Thanks for sharing, Jimmy. And the next one, I've added the AWS ECR auth provider new requirement. I thought, Jimmy, would you like to explain it a bit more about the registry map, or for that's used for different region? I wonder what level would you put the new property? Should it be applicable to the Azure auth provider as well? What do you think?
So here's the, I can't tell you if it should be applicable for the Azure auth provider, because I don't know. This is not a new requirement as much as it is. I think calling it a new requirement is being charitable. I think it is a missed requirement, missed on my end. So, but in subsequent testing, I realized, oh no, I need basic credentials for each region, because ECR is region specific, and it under the covers, there's some, when Kubelet is pulling images or whatever, I don't know the plumbing, but I mean, I don't have to, I don't know how it's doing it on the kubelet side, but on the notation side, I need multiple credentials because I have multiple regions. So the way that I built a prototype just to make sure I understood how this was supposed to work. And so the way that I have it working right now is that I allow the configuration to set up a preload. So let's say I'm running Ratify in one of our regions, but I know that I'm going to be trying to pull images from multiple other regions. I will spec out the region, the ECR region specific, account specific URL, and I'll preload those. And so what'll happen is when let's say when Ratify would boot up, and again, I'm not doing this in Ratify, I'm doing this in another prototype, but when the app boots up, then it would go out and look at the preloaded, the request to preload, and it would take that array and go through and walk through and preload each of the credentials into a cached map that is keyed by the actual registry region account specific URL, so that when images come in, I would parse out that registry URL without the actual image data and without the actual image URL piece and without the actual scheme. And then I would use that to see if I already have it cached. And if I do, then it's really fast to get those credentials and start using it. If it's not cached, then I would grab it, cache it, and then move on. And then it would be cached for the next round. And then I have a separate Go routine thread that wakes up every so often and checks for if it's ready to be refreshed based on the expiry of the individual credentials. And so, then that's how I'm refreshing it. So I don't know if you all need that, but I mean, one of the items here is I need to fix this bug, is what it really is, because I need to make sure that multiple regions in the same account could be used. And then and then the second one is while I was in there, I was like, well, maybe we should, because it takes so long to get that call, it takes several seconds to get that credential call. So I thought, why don't we just preload these? If they know the region they're going to be working in, just preload those region registry URLs, and then it's that much faster when they try to use them.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we definitely have we're working between 3 to 7 seconds on completing the verification in the Kubernetes environment.
yeah, a region login, my testing is around 5 or 6 seconds.
Yep.
So yeah, that's something I would like to avoid if possible. So yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
the
what are
only
the new
question,
properties you'll be adding to the auth provider?
Pardon me?
Are you going to add new properties under auth provider?
So I'm trying to figure out where to add them. Like what you're showing right now is where you see cache enabled, and then so I have something similar that I've done. It's basically an ECR cache enabled, true or false, and then it's a load. Then I have 2 time intervals. One is for the thread that's going to wake up and refresh the cache, I had to tell it when to wake up. So after how many seconds should it wake up and go? And then the second thing is I also want to have an interval for, this is already part of the ECR auth, right? So I have a 5-minute interval that says, hey, if I'm looking at getting ready to use this credential and I see that it's going to expire in 5 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and refresh it before I use it. So with this thing here, I need to tell it not only when to wake up and do its thing, but I need to tell it how long between the expiry and now should I consider it to be refreshed so that it doesn't expire. So I have those settings set up there. And it is a different thread in my prototype. It's a whole completely different thread than, let's say, the HTTPS or HTTP daemon it's running. But they're all connected via the same channel. So if one of these threads errors out, the whole thing is going to throw an error. So
Yeah, sounds good. I guess you will give us a demo, or at least we can review the proposed
Absolutely. I mean,
property
I haven't,
changes when you're ready.
well, I haven't figured out how to yet do it inside Ratify yet, because I don't know. I think I need to sit down and talk with, someone, maybe Akash, about what's the best approach to do this, because I know how to do it ECR specific. I mean, I can cache that all day, I guess. But as far as, is there another cache where I should be sticking this in? And if so, how is that cache refreshed? So.
Yeah, these cache properties are related to the referral cache,
Yeah.
right, Akash?
Yeah, that's the new cache that been added, so that's separate. But at the auth cache that we currently use, which caches credentials regardless of your auth provider that you have enabled, that operates at the Aura store level, and it also has an expiry timestamp that's part of the cache entry. So it won't reach out to the auth provider if it finds a valid entry that's not expired. So the only time it'll reach out to it is if it's expired or if it runs into some auth error when it tries to perform one of the registry operations. Then it'll go evict from the cache and then query the auth provider again. So depending on how we implement it, we might need to coordinate, or a larger proposal will be maybe we remove the auth cache from the Aura store specific and then have each auth provider implement their own caches, and then every time we're just querying the auth provider for the credentials, and the caching is just handled by each implementation. But we can set up some time and I can walk you through like the specifics of the code too, if that helps.
Yeah, I think if you look at how I implemented the ECR auth, I actually do have like a 5-minute window where if you hit the credentials and the expiry is going to expire within 5 minutes or or less, then I have it refresh.
Okay.
But I guess my thought was, if I reuse someone else's cache, like I reuse the auth cache, I need to be able to, I mean, I'm assuming I can define a function for it to call if it falls within the window to refresh. Or
Yeah,
if it's expired and it needs to refresh.
Yeah, so the eviction is, there's only two methods of eviction right now. One is if it expires. So if you set that expiry to be whatever interval that you're using in your internal cache implementation to the auth provider, then kind of you get for free where the Aura store will go query the auth provider for the next fresh credentials. And then the other part is if during our registry operations, we run into a auth, like a 401 or a 403, then we trigger a recollection of credentials in the cache.
Yeah, given how long it takes to authenticate and get basic credentials back, that's the reason that I opted for an asynchronous refresh cycle, because I was trying to avoid the potential situation where I had to do an auth in line with doing a verification, because I thought I'm most definitely going to, overrun the time limit for a gatekeeper return.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we also struggle with, we have a couple components in the auth portion when you're initially getting, when you're trading the JOT for the scoped token to access the ACR, that portion can take quite a while, not 5 seconds long, but it's about half a second. But when we're having less than 5 seconds to complete, that adds up for sure. So yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to, maybe we add an extra array where you can specify registries ahead of time, and then that whole credential fetching part happens beforehand if it exists in that array. It's just not all scenarios you are aware of what the registry that you're going to have to deal with is. So.
And then, I mean, you have an eviction process that looks at basically the expiry and it evicts.
Yes.
But it doesn't proactively go back and try to refresh. So the only time it would be added back to the auth cache is if another image needed it.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't have like an async task that's refreshing the cache. Yeah, I think we talked about it at one point, but we just haven't implemented it. So
Okay.
It'd be nice if we could somehow figure out a way to do it for all auth providers too. So
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
Thanks for the discussion. Any
So I'll
other
reach out
items?
to you offline, Akash, maybe to,
yeah, sounds good. Yeah, we can
Okay.
set up some time to chat.
okay. Cool. Sorry, Susan.
Oh, yeah, we'll just we'll need to discuss more. So when you're ready, Jimmy, let me know, or just add it to the agenda whenever you're ready to share the design.
Yeah, that might take a little while, but yeah.
Okay, that's everything we had on the agenda. Anything else, anyone?
I wanted to briefly talk about, I know we discussed adding like a nightly build solution. So I had started to just do some investigation to see what that would take. And wanted to get people's opinion on like what the cadence should be. And then when we're pushing a build, should it be to like a specific tag that just gets overridden every time, like maybe like a nightly tag, or are we going to want to keep track of like each day is a unique tag, and then how that would play into the direction we give a developer to grab, like override the charts repository and tag value to get the latest nightly build. And then finally, the other part is when you have nightly builds, we need to have some sort of retention policy that we build into the registry and set so that it's cleaning up all of those old builds and we're not having a ginormous amount of old images. So yeah, I guess the first part, the cadence, do we want to do 24 hours or?
So I reached out to Shiwei to because they had something similar set up for Notary. His recommendation was they started with nightly, but they eventually realized that a lot of the builds were repetitive because there weren't like mergers going every day, and so his recommendation was do a weekly, so that people can still like try a more or less recent build, and then we can basically get feedback if people need it in a more like frequent cadence. We can definitely try that. So my recommendation, I agree on this one, would be to do weekly. I would love to hear from others here. Jimmy, what do you guys all think?
So the only issue I have with let's say off-cycle builds, in particular with the notation side of the house, was my experience with it was that if I were to point to a specific build in between milestones, it would disappear. And so, my internal builds would break, and I'd have to go back and then manually rediscover what is the latest build after this last milestone so that I could use the latest build. So if we were to do start an off-cycle build cadence, regardless of what it is, would we also be pruning these? So let's say we do one every week, and then at the end of that, when we do the weekly one, are we going to prune the prior week's build? Because that can play havoc with folks. I mean, I understand why we would do it, because we don't want old things to linger, but at the same time,
If we kept 1 month, like if we did weekly and we kept our 4 weeks of rotating window, would that work, Jimmy?
I think it would be a better user experience. I mean, it's okay if that's what we're going to do, is prune the old stuff in between milestones. You're just throwing out the bad experience I had with the notation side. So, I mean, once I started using the RC2, then I didn't have an issue. I mean, I've been building so many times since then, and it's always been there. But the off-cycle builds would disappear after a week or so.
Do we have any limitations in terms of like quota for storing builds in from days labs? Like, it would be a good follow-up. I agree. I feel like maybe retaining all the builds in between milestones makes sense. So, but I would love to follow up with Dayslas and or folks who know more about like the limits or quota we have for storing builds for this project. So I think that's a good proposal to look at. Do a weekly and then keeping all internal releases in between big milestones. I think the other big discussion here is how do we tag them in such a way that people know it's an internal release as opposed to a release candidate or something that's been a little bit more blessed.
So, I mean, a lot of times if you were to look at the notation side of the house, it would be tagged with a milestone and then a date after that. So, and it would be like dev, it would be milestone and then dev and that the date that build was made. I think that was, if I remember right, that's how it was done so that you could see that it was in fact a dev build. And so we document it correctly, then we can, people will know that it's a dev build. It's got a shorter life cycle, and we document what that life cycle expectation is. No more than 4 weeks, or no more than 2 weeks, whatever we decide, right? And then maybe we also wipe them out when we cut the milestone, right? So if we were to start making RC2 dev builds, and then when RC3 comes out, we would expect that RC2 dev builds would be pruned. And then from then on, it would be RC3 dev builds until whatever the next milestone is.
Yeah, that makes sense. The good feedback, Jimmy. I wonder, do they also have like a date and also maybe like a latest? So whoever wants to pin to a specific date, they can do that. And then whoever doesn't care can just point to the latest and they don't have to update their charts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a developers using latest is a guilty pleasure. I like that. I would obviously never use it in a production environment, but latest, it's because it's non-deterministic. However, that's probably something I could have done. I have a bad habit of putting, or maybe it's a good habit, but I have a habit of putting the exact tag that I'm trying to get, right? So
yeah, no latest. But all right, so Akash, you had a couple of questions.
Yeah, so the other option is if we wanted to avoid the repetitive builds, we can build into the workflow where it checks the Git revision to see if in the last 24 hours there's been any changes. And if there has, then it'll do a build. And if it hasn't, then it won't do anything. That's another option.
I like that.
Yeah.
The only drawback I see is if, I mean, the worst thing that can happen is we're building every single day. So we're already talking about that anyways, right? Well, I think we also talk about building only every week. I don't know. So
yeah, the proposal was every week. I feel like we also need to figure out like what's the limit here we have in terms of build retention. And also I love to kind of like if we really feel like users or like customers are really like in need of a daily build or like a build every single check-in, and we can go there. I think doing the weekly is a good compromise to be able to test a relatively recent build while at the same time sort of reducing some of the costs of maintaining like all these different builds. But again, like I need to follow up in terms of kind of what's the actual cost of and quota we have for storing builds. Good follow up for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's not mutually exclusive, right? I mean, so if we decided we build every day or we build every week, and we only build every week or every day if there are changes, which there probably will be every week, but maybe not every day. And then would we also have the ability to do out of cycle builds, like manually trigger an out of cycle build? Or is it we're going to stick strictly to the automation, to the cadence, I should say?
I mean, it's possible to add like a workflow dispatch so you can automatically, like manually trigger it.
Yeah.
So I think we should be able to support both, but hopefully if we implement it right, it shouldn't be that hard to support the manual as well. So
May I ask who needs to use this recent build? Like, what's the motivation here? For testing, or is it for somebody else who wants to consume it?
So in my situation, it was a notation thing, and I was waiting for the fallback to be added to notation, right, to 1.0. And so I had to use dev builds because it wasn't out in RC2 yet. Now it is, but it wasn't. So that's what I was doing, was using the most updated builds for my testing. So the situation would be primarily for folks, I think that would be, these folks would be closer to the actual cycle of development for Ratify and know that there's some PR that just was merged, but it's not going to be available, and it's not available to the next milestone. Can we get a dev build so that I can start testing it?
I see.
Right. I mean, a recent example I can think of is if we excluded like the plugin support from RC1, and it didn't, like, it will be part of RC2 now, but like folks who wanted to test that out or to try that out earlier, they would need to basically like make a build from main. So I've heard it mainly from other developers contributing to the project.
Yeah, I think Kara and Noel, they both had similar concerns. Not concerned, like they had wanted a dev build so they can test their changes quicker.
Right.
Yeah, and to be honest, I ran into the same thing, and when I was actually writing the override code for the ECR auth code, and we didn't have it, obviously, so I had to build it locally. I should say I built it up inside AWS using code build. So it's just you could see it as a convenience thing, but I mean, it's a recognized pattern by some other projects, notation being one of them, I guess.
So can we do like a compromise where we can have a weekly, but we can trigger it manually if we want to?
Yeah, I'm not really married to any decision. I mean, I mean, maybe it's a matter of maybe it goes into the contribution guidelines or the feedback guidelines as to if we, if someone needs a dev build this week, they could request it as an issue, maybe. What are your thoughts? I mean, what would be if we were only going to do it manually and we didn't know, and we didn't plan on doing it, how would people give us feedback that they needed it, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I can give context on what happened with Notation Azure Keyword plugin. They went down the path of doing daily, and then it became a cleanup nightmare with some random tags and things like that. So
right.
I think the point is there is clearly a compromise where you can trigger a manual build with an issue or something like that. We can have like, okay, let's open an issue and maybe define this is how you can request a dev build, but it can automatically happen every week so that we don't have to wait for like maybe Monday morning or Monday evening or something like that. Just pick a cadence and then just go with that, right? And get feedback from that. I think that might be the easiest thing.
Yep. Yeah, that's the proposal, to do a weekly.
Okay.
again, like Sajay, do you know if like Days Labs or if we have any quota in terms of, because the other question is, how long do we retain these builds? We basically just discussed keeping the builds in between milestones. Do you know if we have any quotas around the builds that we can keep, or?
I think Bridget can help you with that.
Okay, got
you
it.
only org account, right? So
Sounds good. Yep. And yeah, that's, I mean, ideally we would only be keeping between 4 and 5 builds.
yeah,
per milestone.
What's
So
in between the milestones? Yeah.
Right.
Maybe the discussions could be how we manually, maybe someone puts it in a discussion and then we decide to do a build. It doesn't
Sure.
have to necessarily be an issue. I don't know. I'm just saying if we decide we're going to do it manually.
Yeah,
Or trigger it, I should say trigger it manually.
Yeah, this is only if we don't, if the weekly build is not good enough, right? Like,
right.
Okay.
Okay, we're at time now. Thanks for joining, everyone. I'll update the notes soon and the recording. Yeah, I'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you.